Coming up on The World Today. UN nuclear experts remain at Russian-held Zaporizhia power plant after making their first inspection of the plants south of Ukraine. Aung San Suu Kyi given 3 more years for election fraud. And thermometer hit 127 degrees Fahrenheit as Death Valley in the US records Earth's hottest ever September day. A warm welcome to you. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. The G7 group of nations have announced plans for a price cap on Russian oil. The cap is designed to reduce Russian revenue to finance the war in Ukraine and tackle inflation in the West. The level has not been announced, but the G7 say it will be implemented urgently. Russia says it will not export to countries that participate in the cap. The Group of Seven is an organization made up of leading economies which dominate global trade and the international financial system. They are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the United States. But China and India, which have both large economies, are not in the group. Some G7 officials have expressed concerns that the price cap will not be successful without the participation of those two nations. India and China have both increased their purchases of Russian oil since the war in Ukraine began. Now, the price cap document states that the G7 countries are carrying out extensive and ongoing engagement with a diverse group of countries and key stakeholders to set the price level and mechanism for implementing it. It says the alliance seeks to establish a broad coalition in order to maximize effectiveness, as well as urging countries importing Russian oil to commit to doing so only at prices at or below the price cap. The initial price cap will be decided by the full coalition in advance of implementation in each jurisdiction, the agreement adds. But away from the oil price news, the latest prisoners of war exchange has taken place between Ukraine and Russia. 14 Ukrainians were returned from captivity, 10 of them from the 58th Separate Mechanized Brigade and 4 from the 30th Mechanized Brigade. Ukrainian officials said this via telegram. The officials also said they were captured by the occupying forces in spring and released today in Donetsk. Information about the Russian prisoners, including how many were released, is not yet known. The head of the UN atomic watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has said the first tour of key areas in Russian-occupied Zaporizhia nuclear plant was completed, and the IAEA was establishing a continued presence there. According to operator Energoatom, one of 2 reactors at the complex was shut down because of Russian shelling, while Russia's defense ministry said a Ukrainian sabotage group tried to seize the plant ahead of the IAEA visit. In a video released on social media, Mr. Grossi was standing outside the power plant and was speaking after spending several hours at the plant, braving gunfire he said had come uncomfortably close. Other inspectors from the IAEA as well were seen walking inside a turbine room at the power plant. Mr. Grossi and his team of UN experts returned today across the front lines to assess the physical damage to Europe's biggest nuclear energy plant.
We are finishing our long-awaited visit to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. I have just completed a first tour of the key areas that we wanted to see in this first approach to the whole facility. Of course, there is a lot more to do. My team is staying on, and more importantly, and most importantly, we are establishing a continued presence from the IAEA.
Meanwhile, Russian rockets hit Sloviansk late last night, leaving a kindergarten destroyed. According to Donetsk Region Administration, at least 100 children attended the kindergarten. Local authorities reported 4 dead and 10 wounded caused by Russian rocket attacks in the region. Nearly 2,300 educational institutions have been shelled or bombed since the Russian invasion began February 24, and 286 were completely destroyed. This is according to Ukraine's Ministry of Education and Science. More than 350 children have died and 586 wounded during what Russia calls a special military operation. Well, joining us right now for more on the conflict there is Mr. John Essing. He's a lawyer and counterterrorism expert. He joins us from London. Thank you for joining me on the programme. Let's begin from the front lines. This war, which seems unending, now in its sixth month, yet Ukraine's Zelensky and troops are making efforts, for example, to take back Kherson. This is looking like a phase for Ukraine now, isn't it? Just take us through the phases that we've had so far, especially from the Ukrainian point.
Thank you for having me, Millicent. It's a pleasure to be here. You're right about the fact that the front line, the current front line is Kherson and Zaporizhia. But this was when it started on the 24th of February. The front line at the time was Kiev. If you remember, there was a 40-mile column of tanks and artillery that were heading for Kiev. But what the Russians hadn't understood was that Kiev was that the Ukrainians were ready. The Russians wanted to take it by surprise. They wanted to topple the central institutional power structures of Ukraine, decapitate the leadership, and convert the government, substitute with a Russian copy that will be beholden to the Kremlin. But that didn't happen. And after that, the Russians made the excuse that what they had intended all along, the strategic interest all along was in the Donbass in the east. So they changed strategy and went to the east. But by the time the war in the east started, the Ukrainians weren't ready because the weapons they had used to defeat the Russians when they wanted to invade Ukraine were short-range missile launchers. There were Stingers and Javelins, from what I remember, that they got from the Americans. And they were able to destroy the tank columns, and they won that war. But while they waited for the long-range capabilities from the US, they didn't get there on time, so they got pushed out of. They made a tactical withdrawal from Severodonetsk, but they could not hold on to the Lysychansk. They were pushed out eventually, and the Russians were able to take all of the Luhansk region, half of the Donbass, if you remember. Now, for the first time, the Ukrainians decided to change strategies, because when they got the long-range capabilities, the HIMARS and the MLRSs, they started launching attacks deep behind enemy lines, as long as 300 miles behind the Russian lines, destroying high-value targets of the Russian capabilities, including airfields, ammunition, and fuel dumps, fuel tanks. They destroyed lots of things and actually slowed the Russians down from making their advances forward. And especially the HIMARS have been very helpful, because that's what they're using particularly at the moment. But now that the conflict has turned to Kherson, Zelensky has promised to take back Kherson, because Kherson is a strategic location, not just for the Russians, but for Ukraine as well.
Yes, but then we know Russia is refusing to say that there is any headway for the Ukrainians. Let's look at Russia on the other hand. They started with invading different parts. You mentioned Kyiv, and later said it was going to focus on the East Donbass region, withdrawing its troops. But it seems a lot of things have changed since then. What phase is Russia in now, and what do you see them doing next?
The phase they're in at the moment is having to defend Kherson, because they were in the Donbass. That didn't go really well. Although they were, I'm sure you remember, they were able to take Severodonetsk and Luhansk, but at a very high cost. So when Zelensky decided to change strategies and go on the counter-offensive in Kherson, Putin decided to withdraw forces from the Donbass to be able to defend Kherson, because that's the only real city they've been able to capture. They captured it at the very beginning of the war, and they haven't been able to capture any other city the size of Kherson after that. So Russia's strategy at the moment, they're still launching low-intensity attacks in Donbass just to try and keep as much of the Ukrainian forces concentrated in the Donbass, while they're trying to defend Kherson as well. But what the Ukrainians are doing they're hitting, high-value targets behind enemy lines in Kherson itself. They're taking out ammunition dumps, command control posts. They're taking out supply lines. They bombed 4 of the bridges that were on the Sniper River. And the Russians are in front of the bridges. So now they've bombed it. The Russians will either have to go back to retreat backwards without taking any of their heavy armor, or come forward towards the Ukrainians. So they're more or less encircled. So Ukraine is doing much better in Kherson.
Let's move over to Zaporizhia and, the power plant. Perhaps one question also, one wonders what the focus is now and why the focus appears to be on Kherson and Zaporizhia, what interest it is to the parties. But then there is a demand by the UN, by the EU about demilitarization of that plant. But will Russia agree to it?
No, I don't see Russia agreeing. But let's start with Kherson. The reason Kherson is a strategic point for both Russia and Ukraine is that when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, Ukraine was able to cut off the electricity source for Crimea, which is the Zaporizhia plant, and they were able to stop the canalways that feed fresh water from Kherson into Crimea as well. So that is very strategic, and it's the first city that Russia actually took, for that reason, because they want to secure both the Zaporizhia and Kherson to be able to open up, to be able to get electricity from Zaporizhia and then water from Kherson. But for the Ukrainians, they want to stop that, because then it'll make it a lot more difficult for Crimea to be habitable. So that is why that's a strategic position. But why there's been a lot of chaos about the bombings in Zaporizhia? It's just the Russians trying to threaten. It's a sort of wolf warrior diplomacy. It's coercive intimidation. They're just trying to intimidate the Ukrainians, because everyone understands the danger, the catastrophe that might occur if any of those 6 radiators are bombed. They're all Soviet era radiators, and they're very old. So if anything happens to any of them, there'll be disaster, and they understand that. But despite all they've been trying to do, no one has bombed any of those radiators in the facility. If they had wanted to bomb it, if they wanted anything destroyed, they'd know the targets. They would have done it by now, because they're occupying the facility anyway. So,
but there is still the blame game. This is between Moscow and Kyiv. But talk to us about the probability of human error in the safety measures at the plant. That is a possibility, isn't it?
It's a possibility, and it's very high, because from what we hear, the Ukrainians who are actually responsible for the plants are being maltreated by the Russians, so that they can't really concentrate on their jobs, and that's a job you have to be very cautious. You have to be very careful, because of the danger, the catastrophe that may occur as a result of a simple mistake. And I know that the AIA has got some of this information as well, which is why the international community negotiated for them for their presence. But now they're there. I don't know what they're trying to negotiate. But I know that Russia will not vacate that plant for the Ukrainians, because it belongs to the Ukrainians. As soon as they vacate it, the Ukrainians will cut off the electricity to Crimea. And even as of now, I'm hearing that the Russians are trying to fit the grid that supplies that electricity to connect it to Crimea. So.
Quite interesting. Finally, before I let you go, the autumn and winter seasons are approaching, and Zelensky has said that, this war must end with Ukraine victorious by December. What do you see happening?
To begin with, December is not going to happen. We'll see this war go on for at least another couple of years. And as the autumn is setting it'll be very difficult to carry on with off-road maneuver warfare. You can only do that in summer is a good time for that. But in winter, especially heavy automobile that have teeth in the ground, they find it very difficult to move. And the Russians rely a lot on their trucks, on their heavy artillery and tanks, and they'll have a lot of difficulty doing that. That's why the war is going to be intensive in the next 6 or 7 weeks before the autumn sets in, because everyone is trying to leverage their postures to get as much advantage as they can before the winter comes. I think what Zelensky is probably focusing on now is to be able to demonstrate to the West with the war in Kherson at the moment that he can hold his own, that he can be trusted, that he needs the assistance and that he can be trusted with the assistance. And he needs to demonstrate to his people after the war in the Donbass that he needs to give them some kind of hope, because even though, despite the resistance of the Ukrainians, Russia has been making fundamental but gradual progress in the Donbass. When the war started, it only had 7% of Ukrainian territory, but now it's gone up to 20. So that's a 13% difference in 6 months, which is quite a lot, but at a very high cost for the Russians. So he wants to try to impress the West, and hoping that as the energy cost rises, as inflation rises, as food insecurity rises, that they'll just try and stick with him, get him through the autumn and the winter, and put him on a good footing ahead of the summer.
Well,
but this war is not going to finish in December, and I'm sure he realizes that by now.
We will continue to watch the developments from the conflict. We'd like to thank you, Mr. John Essen, as a lawyer and counterterrorism expert. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, Minister. Bye-bye.
Meantime, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that the country will boost its military capacity in the northwest if the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is going to set up bases in Finland and Sweden. Speaking at an event in Moscow, Mr. Lavrov noted that once the NATO deploys or decides on establishing military bases in the territory of Finland and Sweden, Russia shall be convinced that US will be in control and will enhance its armed forces in the northwestern part of the country. Finland shares a more than 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, the longest one among EU members. And German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said during a panel discussion in Prague that Germany would stand with Ukraine and that sanctions against Russia will be upheld even in the coming winter. Looking at the next winter and the energy crisis in Europe, she said that sanctions needed to be prepared so they could be upheld for the next 2 years if needed.
If I give the promise as a politician, and luckily in democracy, it could be the chance that people disagree with me and they say in 4 years, well, you didn't tell us the truth. But if I give the promise to people in Ukraine, we stand with you as long as you need us, then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine. And this means every measure I'm taking, I have to be clear that this holds on as long as Ukraine needs me. And this is why I think it's so important that we have to be frank. Yes, everybody wishes from us that tomorrow the war stops, but in case tomorrow it wouldn't stop, I will be also there in 2 years' time.
The White House has announced that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and United States President Joe Biden will meet on September 16. This announcement comes as the administration looks to draw African nations closer to the U.S. at a time when South Africa and many of its neighbors have staked out neutral ground on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Last month, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the Biden administration sees Africa's 54 nations as equal partners in tackling global problems during a visit to South Africa. But the administration has been disappointed that South Africa and much of the continent have declined to follow the U.S. in condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. South Africa abstained in a UN's vote to condemn Russia's action, and Mr. Ramaphosa has avoided any criticism of Russia and has instead called for a mediated peace. Still ahead on the program. Gun jams during a bid to kill Argentina's vice president. Stay with us. Welcome back. And earlier today, this is before the G7 reports on the price cap for Russian oil. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen had said that the world needed to fight back against what she believes were Russian president's attempts to manipulate the European energy market. She told reporters on the sidelines of a meeting of German conservative lawmakers in the town of Manaus that she firmly believes that it is now time for that price cap on Russian pipeline gas to Europe. Meanwhile, in Germany, there were major traffic and mobility issues, still are, and there is also an airline strike, troubles on the rail and steeply rising gas prices. Lars Holter, Deutsche Welle correspondent, joins me now from Berlin for more on that. And Lars, I hope you stay there for the rest of the week because getting anywhere else could be tricky. Talk to us about the strike at Germany's biggest airline, Lufthansa.
Yes, it's yet another strike at Lufthansa. Now, Lufthansa has just ended a major battle with its ground crews that saw hundreds and thousands of flights cancelled and many people, of course, inconvenienced. Lufthansa is quite used to strikes, but every single one, of course, is a major problem for all the customers. Now, what is this one all about? Money. That's probably no surprise. This time it's the pilots that want more money. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because when the ground crews were on strike a couple of weeks ago, people were quite sympathetic to their cause because, of course, their wages are not too high. But now with the pilots, it's a whole different story because their jobs, of course, are among definitely the better paid jobs, not only for Lufthansa, but in the entire German economy. Lufthansa actually has made them an offer too. They want to raise wages for all pilots by €900 a month. Plus, they also want to add in inflation starting next year. That would mean young pilots with relatively low pay, and I'm really saying relatively low pay, they would get 18% more, and then the most senior pilots would still make 5% more. But now we're talking about people making €275,000 per year. So it's understandable that a lot of people are having a hard time feeling for them here. They also ask for more sick days, for more vacation days. Lufthansa says they can't afford it, especially since, of course, over the last 2 or 3 years of the pandemic, they have lost a lot of money and a lot of business in general. There is just no way for them. They had lost revenue. They had to have extra costs due to recent strikes as well. What does it all come to today? Of course, we are seeing 800 flights cancelled, everything cancelled out of Munich and Frankfurt, and that means inconveniences for 130,000 passengers.
And as usually, train travel is a good alternative to flying, but there are major problems there as well.
Yes, there's definitely big problems for trains as well. The German rail company Deutsche Bahn, they've always had certain problems. Trains are unreliable, they're often late, and they're not as fast as in many other developed countries. But problems really got worse recently, and that partially came to light due to a very positive initiative here by the German government. We had for the last couple of months what was called the €9 ticket. People just had to pay €9 a month for unlimited rail travel throughout Germany. And of course, millions jumped on that. Trains, of course, then were overbooked. There wasn't enough capacity for Deutsche Bahn to add more trains. So we saw huge delays, and the whole country basically saw that it will take major investment into rail to get service up to where it should be. The €9 ticket, of course, has been a huge success with over 50 million tickets sold, 20% of which actually went to people who are not traditionally using train travel. And initially, of course, that whole thing had another factor in there too, and that was, of course, to be more environmentally friendly. It was a huge success there too. 1.8 million tons of CO2 emissions were saved.
And Laz, so does that mean that everyone is back to taking the car? You know, is that at least working for Germans, or are there other issues at play? And why do I think you're about to tell me something not pleasant as well?
Yes, the cars are still running, the roads are fine, but here's the problem. Gasoline and diesel have just gone up big time overnight. In the midst of the energy crisis that we are in, with higher cost of living for most people in Germany, the government had approved for the last couple of months a rebate system that cut the cost of car fuel. That was in place for 3 months, and it saved Germans millions of euros. Even though, to be honest, it is unclear how much of the government rebate was actually really passed along to consumers and how much of it was pocketed by oil companies. However, the rebate system now has run out, and overnight prices for gas and diesel shot up by 20 cents or more per liter, and that, of course, now makes filling up a tank a lot more expensive. So sadly, right now on this very day, whether you look at planes, trains or automobiles, it's really not a pretty picture anywhere.
So Deutsche Welle correspondent from Berlin, thank you for that update. To other stories, the number of COVID-19 cases worldwide has surpassed 600 million, according to latest data from the World Health Organization. The WHO reported that there had been 600,555,262 confirmed COVID-19 cases globally, including over 6 million deaths as of Thursday. The WHO also said that despite a current downward trend in new cases, more hospitalizations and deaths are expected in the coming months as colder weather approaches. Joining me now is a health scientist, Dr. Abdulaziz Bako, for more on this. I'd like to thank you for joining us. This welcome decline is reported for COVID-19 deaths globally, but does that mean the coast is clear?
Thank you for having me. I don't think that that's an optimistic statement, and that is where we are hoping to get, but I don't think we are still there. We are still having more variants popping up every now and then. So we will hope that we will be there at some point in time where we could be at a little bit of ease, but this is not a disease that is going away anytime soon.
So when they describe colder weather approaching the Northern Hemisphere, how worse could things get in the coming months?
Things can get really bad, especially if there are no measures in place, or the measures that are being put in place are not being much adhered to by the people. So it is possible that we could see a spike in infection rate, or even change in or increasing number of variants popping up, and also people getting infected. Because even right now, every now and then we see some spikes in the rate of COVID-19 infection.
Would you say that, I mean, when you look at where we've come from 2020 up to this point, that the Omicron variant was the beginning of the end for COVID-19? Because even though, you know, it was more transmissible, it's become milder, less potent, and also because vaccination coverage, or perhaps because vaccination coverage among the most at-risk people remains low.
we're definitely better off at this point in time compared to 2019 when this started. We didn't have any vaccine for the disease. We didn't have any treatment that is shown to be effective or beneficial to people who have the infection. Right now, we have some drugs that have shown to be effective against the virus. We have vaccines that have been shown to be effective. So we are in a really better place than we are in 2019 and 2020. But yes, we will hope that this is the era in which we will have a firm grip on this ravaging pandemic.
Do you think the world is ready for another pandemic?
I don't think so. We have done a lot in kind of getting ready to handle pandemics, to share data, to work closely together, and remove all the barriers that prevent research and also prevent development of drugs in a rapid environment. But there's a lot of things that we need to do in terms of public perception, fake news, misinformation, especially with social media, with the infodemic. There's a lot to be done because pandemics are not just a product of the disease, but also a product of how ready the institutions are, but not only how ready the institutions are, how ready the public is to adhere to guidelines and specific advisories.
I'd like to thank you, health scientist Dr. Abdulaziz Bakr, joining us from Texas. Thanks again.
Thank you.
On to other stories. Argentina's Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was unharmed, and this happened Thursday when a man with a loaded gun tried to shoot her, but the gun did not go off. The attack underscores rising political tension in Argentina and around the region that has put politicians on edge from Colombia to Brazil. President Alberto Fernández said in a televised address that a man had pointed a firearm at her head and pulled the trigger, adding that for some reason that has yet to be confirmed, the gun did not fire. The president said the gun had been loaded with 5 bullets. He dubbed the act as the most serious event the country had experienced since its return to democracy. Meanwhile, it was Argentines woke up to shock, the news of the vice president, the victim of a dramatic assassination attempt outside her home overnight. 37-year-old Pedro Eduardo said it hurt him very much. He wants the country to move forward and not with this violence. Her suspected assailant, whom authorities identified as a 35-year-old man of Brazilian origin, was quickly arrested by police and the weapon was seized. Another resident, Ramos Ortiz, amid tears, said he was deeply shocked by the assassination attempt, saying that she is a very respectable woman and doesn't deserve what they are doing to her. A divisive figure inside Argentina who was president between 2007 and 2015, Fernández de Kirchner, is on trial for corruption linked to public contracts awarded in the early 2000s. Over to Britain, where Extinction Rebellion supporters entered the House of Commons debating chamber and superglued themselves around the Speaker's chair. Videos and photos posted on social media by the group show 5 people inside the chamber holding banners reading, "Let the people decide" and "Citizens Assembly now." The group also hung a large banner bearing the same words from scaffolding on the estate, and protesters padlocked themselves to gates outside Parliament. The group, which has previously caused days of traffic chaos in central London, typically protests climate change issues. They said the protesters were reading a speech which included Britain's House of Commons said it was dealing with the incident on the parliamentary estate today following a series of posts made by the group on Twitter. And a military-run court in Myanmar has sentenced Aung San Suu Kyi to a further 3 years in prison on election fraud charges. According to her lawyer, Ms. Suu Kyi, the country's former leader, has now been sentenced to 20 years in prison on 11 counts, with several charges remaining. She denies all of the accusations, and the trials have been condemned by rights groups as politically motivated. If convicted on all charges, she could face almost 200 years in prison. The new sentence included hard labor. Her lawyer said the 77-year-old Nobel laureate spent most of her time in detention under house arrest in the capital of Naypyidaw. The public and media have had no access to the closed-door hearings, and the military has prevented her lawyers from speaking to journalists. Or over in Chile, they closed the electoral campaign for the constitutional referendum with several events in Santiago that brought together thousands of people, mainly supporters of the proposed new constitution. Shouting, "I approve," thousands of people gathered in Alameda, one of the capital's main avenues, to defend the new text, which was drafted over a year by a progressive convention with parity between men and women. Meanwhile, groups opposed to the new constitution gathered in a hotel in Chile's capital and focused their latest efforts on persuading citizens to vote against the text on September 4th. Chileans are torn between those who support it and those who are against it. Nearly 80% of Chileans voted to draft a new constitution in 2020, a year after violent protests against inequality rattled the world's top copper-producing nation. Over in Pakistan, displaced people from Rajouri city in northeastern Punjab province said more aid is needed after recent devastating floods washed away their homes, rendering them helpless. One displaced resident is reported as saying, "People from the government don't allow us to go to them. They don't give us rations. When we demand rations, they say, 'Why don't you work?' What can we do now that our houses are swept away by the floods?" Record monsoon rains and melting glaciers in northern mountains have triggered floods that have killed at least 1,208 people, including 416 children, according to the National Disaster Management Authority. Death Valley in California has recorded what's thought to be the hottest ever September day anywhere on the planet. Thermometers briefly knocked up to 53 degrees Celsius in Furnace Creek at 4 p.m. on the first day of the new month, September, surpassing the previous record, 52.2 degrees Celsius. The new record for September comes a day after Death Valley hit 50 degrees in August, but still fell short of the hottest ever temperature for Earth, which was recorded at the same location on July 10, 1913. Then the heat peaked at 56.7 degrees Celsius. Forecasters had been predicting that Death Valley could see a new record over the coming days, with California in the grip of what's been described as a dangerous heat wave. In Africa, where some countries battle drought and rising inflation, families in parts of Somalia affected by conflict are receiving cash donations by the International Committee of the Red Cross. This emergency relief is the first in a series of monthly payments to support people pushed out of their homes by severe drought.
Thanks to the International Committee of the Red Cross, about 150,000 families have already benefited from the mobile phone-based cash assistance plan. Each family was given $90 to cover the cost of food or other basic items through the program run by the ICRC. When Nadir Ahmed Adan received the grant, he says he used $50 to open a small shop and the rest to buy food for the family.
I left Bako region after losing my livestock because of the drought. The rains fell for 3 years, so the animals all died.
The drought has lasted for 4 consecutive rainy seasons, and its economic impact on the vulnerable communities is aggravated by the protracted armed conflict and rising food and fuel prices. Cash assistance aims to help the most vulnerable survive and to minimize their debt.
I transport from Bako to Belewene on credit. I paid back my debt to the driver after receiving money from ICRC.
With the next rainfall due in October, rural families stripped of their livelihoods continue to flee to towns, hoping to receive help from relatives and aid groups. To help people build resilience in the face of the worsening impact of climate shocks, agricultural cooperatives are being supported with drought-resistant seeds, farming tools, training and cash for fuel needed to irrigate.
We do this to keep their farming business going, despite the drought.
The ICRC is distributing cash assistance to people in conflict-affected parts of Somalia, as well as rehabilitating boreholes and wells. The agency also supports primary health care services.
Coming up next. It's a pampered two-headed tortoise, Janus. He turns 25 in world record. We'll tell you more when we return. Africans and the Caribbeans must consciously begin to break down barriers, perceived or real, hampering business relationship between both regions. This was part of the submissions by speakers at the inaugural edition of the Afri-Exim Bank-sponsored Afri-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum taking place in Barbados. Well, joining us live from Bridgetown, Barbados, is Ambassador Benoit Yaga Okoyen. He's Nigeria's ambassador to Cuba, with concurrent accreditation to the Bahamas, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much for having me on your platform.
Ambassador, we understand today, this started 2 days ago, but we understand that there have been several plenary meetings today. But is this the first of its kind between, the continent of Africa and the Caribbean?
Yes, this Trade and Investment Forum is the first of its kind across the two continents, and it's well organized, and the participation is very encouraging.
Talk to us about the Nigerian delegation to the forum and the nature of conversations that are, have been had or planned to move this forward.
The Nigerian delegation is very engaging, and we have the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria is here. You have some of the banks, Unity Bank is here, Owando from the oil sector. There are some logistic companies and tourism are also here. It's very engaging, and the level of discussion is geared towards the opportunities that are open for business in these two continents.
But prior to this forum, how much trade did exist or exists between Africa and the Caribbean?
Currently, the volume of trade is very low, and the problem has always been the issue about linkages, the barriers to trade, financial transactions, payment mechanisms have always been very difficult. And so that itself is presenting a great opportunity for businessmen. It's a lot of logistic companies talking about direct flight links on how this can be done. Luckily, is the bank that is organizing this forum with the Barbados government. So it is important that these issues will be addressed. I think the ongoing discussion, negotiation, consultations with the airlines are very visible here. And at the end of the day, we are very hopeful that the route for business will be open up and the opportunities available will be taken up by every participant.
And this is a forum that's also happening, 2 years after, 2 years into the COVID pandemic, and most economies are building back post-COVID and following that impact. So perhaps for Nigeria, what are the major take-homes? Because a little bird told me that Ghana is signing loads of agreements at that forum. Isn't Nigeria signing any? And why not?
Well, that is ongoing. A lot of countries are signing agreements. Like I told you, the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria is also here. Maybe it's not on the news for signing agreement yet, but
Their discussions are going on. The conference is still going on, and we are very hopeful that Nigerians who had interest in coming here will take advantage of the opportunities available here. And we're also witnessing a lot of those consultations, and we hope that we will take home the opportunities and the benefits that this forum is providing.
Ambassador Beno Yaga Okoye is Nigeria's ambassador to Cuba with concurrent accreditation to the Bahamas, Nicaragua and Honduras. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the program. Wish you a fruitful stay there.
Thank you very much for having me once again.
Well, let's go over to South Africa. Violence flared up outside Calafong Tertiary Hospital in Atteridgeville, Pretoria, between members of anti-illegal immigration group Operation Dudula and economic freedom fighters. Dudula, which had been picketing outside the hospital for over 3 weeks, preventing foreign nationals from using the hospital, despite a court interdict by the Gauteng Department of Health. The health minister came visiting as the chaos went on. Channels Television was there and reports.
The Calafong Academic Hospital near Pretoria witnessed all forms of chaos again on Thursday, despite a court interdict, with the economic freedom fighters fighting with Operation Dudula, literally, and the police and the people sometimes caught in the middle.
We find many foreign nationals flooding our healthcare systems, and now the problem is our budget is constrained, and then there are syndicates who are coming to various hospitals and take treatments, and then they, take it out of the country.
We feel that the health minister has failed the people, particularly immigrants who are economic immigrants and asylum seekers who are here in South Africa. How subhuman can we be to treat our own people like this when we deny them access to health care? And this has been happening for more than 3 weeks and they've never done anything.
South Africa's health minister, Dr. Joe Patla, eventually came for an on-site visit to diffuse the tension.
We do accept the fact that our services are under pressure, and that if this demand for services from across our neighbors keeps on increasing, it will reach a stage where it is not sustainable. But we believe that it is not up to ordinary citizens of the country to think that they can deal with that to help the state. No, that is not the correct approach. There are many other challenges which we must deal with to improve the quality of service. We acknowledge that even without the pressure of other neighbors, ourselves we do have challenges.
Tough economic conditions, budget cuts and constraints, and rising anti-foreigner sentiments owing to a seemingly high number of undocumented foreign nationals in the country have seen even public office holders vent their frustration in public.
And then how do you find yourself in Villa and when you are supposed to be with Munangago there? He doesn't give me money to operate you guys. And I'm operating with my limited budget.
They must thank the lucky stars I was not the leader of the country. Because I would walk in that hospital, I will unplug that gas that they are enjoying from South Africa, and I will bring somebody from South Africa, and I will connect them to the gas, so that this gas must be going to South Africans. If they must die, they must die.
These utterances have, of course, sparked national debate on how right or wrong the officers are. But as the debate rages on, what's lost is that some foreign nationals are actually paying patients. Andrew is a Zimbabwean technician who just got out of a public hospital after surgery. He told us how much he feared for his life while in hospital.
The problem that I get in the hospital, it was the challenge of the food. They said they don't give me the food because of I'm a foreigner. I said, okay, it's fine. When they bring the food, I said, I'm full. When I bring the food, I said, I'm full.
Why were you rejecting the food, but you were paying?
No, because if someone say I'm a foreigner, I don't know what they think that they put in the food. So I have to I don't want to eat the food because I don't know what they think that they put in the food. So until the manager or the supervisor, she came, she asked me why you are not eating. I said no. She said I'm a foreigner, so now I'm scared of my life.
Acts of lawlessness, intimidation, and humiliation directed at foreign nationals, whether they are documented or undocumented, should not be tolerated.
President Cyril Ramaphosa condemned any form of intimidation of foreign nationals at health facilities, documented or not. But government says apart from internal efforts to tackle all factors contributing to the challenges, talks are also being considered on ways to reduce pressure on the health sector in collaboration with various home governments of the foreign nationals who use the facilities, not just financially, but also language assistance in some cases. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
And finally on the program, named after the Roman god with two faces, Janus, a Greek turtle who has become a mascot for the Museum of Natural History in Geneva, Switzerland, prepares to celebrate his 25th birthday this weekend, making him the world's oldest bicephalic tortoise. Born on the 3rd September 1997, Janus is a type of turtle that is known for its longevity, usually upwards of 125 years. His rare condition, however, meant that in the wild he would not have survived for long. To keep him on form, his caregivers feed him organic salad and give him daily massages, baths in green tea and chamomile. For exercise, he goes for regular walks, sometimes with music, and rides on a custom-made skateboard. Janus, who has two heads, two hearts, and two sets of lungs, but only one digestive system, is under constant surveillance in case he flips over, which could be mortal. He previously suffered from a large bladder stone that was removed in 2020 and has made a full recovery since then. I wonder what happens. This is, when they decide to walk. In which direction do they go? Well, that's our program this evening. Wishing you a lovely weekend. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.